Welcome back. You are watching News at Prime with me, Masa Gegana. Now, there are growing calls for Treasury to intervene in the devastating budget cuts for basic education. The department's Minister Siviwe Gwarube has warned of the looming funding crisis due to the cuts. While the minister has assured that no teacher jobs will be lost, she says vacant posts won't be filled, instead due to the 4 billion rand shortfall. Now, for more on the possible implications of these budget cuts, I am joined by Professor Metcalfe, an education specialist at the University of Johannesburg. A very good evening to you, Professor. This week, while we were watching and listening to that media briefing by the Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Gwarube, she painted a very bleak picture that we find ourselves in. We also had details of the medium shortfall for all the 9 provinces as well when it comes to basic education. What do you make of this as well? She called it, we're at a point of 5 to midnight.
Well, I think that a national conversation about this is necessary because the solutions that must be found need to be found not only amongst the primary stakeholders, which the minister is rallying, but we need to understand the ways in which we do prioritize basic education and the ways in which together we can become more efficient. So what I mean by that is that basic education is the highest expenditure in our national budget after we've paid debt. And I think that's the first conversation that's necessary. I'm not an economist, I'm a teacher. And I understand that there's huge debates amongst economists about whether one should borrow more in order to have more to spend on key priorities like education. But when I see that the national debt is the largest expenditure item, then I think there's a conversation that's necessary about, do we need to borrow more money in order to have more money for education, or do we take it from elsewhere in the budget? So at the moment, we're spending about 312 billion every year on education. The second thing we need to start thinking about is if we can use our education resources more efficiently, more effectively, so that the money that we spend brings the returns that we want.
Prof, when you're mentioning too that, you're a teacher, I want to also play this back because teachers as well has been a contentious topic as well when it comes to these budget cuts as well. Let's take a listen to what the minister had to say.
If provinces are saying we're not going to be able to fill posts where vacancies are created, that means we're going to be dealing with large class sizes. Already we're dealing with an overcrowding issue, particularly in provinces where we are seeing higher in-migration. The MEC in Gauteng will tell you that every single year he sees an increase of hundreds of thousands of learners coming here because of, obviously, parents seeking economic opportunities. So also as a government, we also have to be responsive in how budgeting. We can't lament that learners are coming to centers of economic opportunities. We then have to be responsive to that. How do we make sure that our budget follows the kind of in-migration that we're seeing? So I'm worried that if we're not filling critical posts, we're going to see classrooms up to a ratio of 1 to 80, potentially in many years to come. And my worry with that is that we can't then be saying we want to improve education outcomes in South Africa if we are expecting an educator to teach a classroom of 80 learners. There's absolutely no way you can drive outcomes and protect learning and teaching time in that environment.
Well, Professor, you heard the minister there also talking about that challenge that we've already been facing of overcrowding.
Yes. Now let's look at conditions of overcrowding and understand where that's happening. So correctly, Gauteng is seeing huge in-migration. Now that in-migration is captured in the census and it should be reflected in the amount of money that's given to Gauteng through the provincial equitable share for the Provincial Executive Council to allocate resources. So where we have more children coming into a province because of in-migration, then that should be reflected in the education budget. There are also provinces where there's an exodus of children, most notably in the Eastern Cape, and that should also be reflected in the amount of money that the province gets as a whole and which they allocate to education. But when I talk about efficiencies, I also think it's important to look at class sizes from grade 1 to grade 12 and to see if there's ways in which we can have thorough conversations to look at where the resources are prioritized. Because of the national focus, often on the National Senior Certificate, because of the larger range of subjects in grades 10, 11, and 12, we tend to see the smaller class sizes there and the larger class sizes in the foundation phase and in the intermediate phase, grade 1 to 3, and then 4 to 5, 4 to 6. Now, maybe we need to think about saying, let's look up at how we deploy our teachers so that the large class sizes are avoided, and certainly are avoided in the primary school, which is where we tend to see the problem. The other issue in relation to the way that we deploy our most valuable asset, which is the teachers, is to be very clear that the teachers that are currently employed, I'm not aware of any province that says that they're going to be retrenching teachers. That doesn't seem to be on the cards now. It's the difficult question of how we deploy our teachers most efficiently and most effectively. And there's a false logic that often exists in education that we don't need office-based posts. Now, there can be a very critical think in some provinces about how effectively they're using teachers, educators, not in the classroom, in the system. But we need efficient administration to properly support the work of teaching and learning. So far, no talk of teacher retrenchment. We need good and robust conversations about how we use our teachers most effectively. And then we need to look at repetition and wastage in the system so that we focus on key priorities.
And I guess it is, a slight positive that so far there is no talk about teacher retrenchments, but the current status quo is also not the ideal one too, Prof, because when we're looking at vacancies and the vacant posts for teachers, I mean, nationally we're sitting at 31,000, a minimum of 31,000. With budget cuts, we are not going to be able to get even a fraction of those 31,000 posts filled.
I need to check the vacancies because, those figures fluctuate all of the time. And I think that, I'm not sure if Minister Gwarube gave figures for current vacancies. But again, it's a question of saying, where are those vacancies? How do we support teachers to be able to teach in environments which are convenient, close to their home, all of those issues when we move them about. So every year, the fees determine what number of posts are going to be available for the next year. According to the Educators Employment Act, that should be done by the end of September. And then it's the task of the administration, led by the head of the provincial department, to deploy teachers and to make sure that we use them sensibly. That is easier said than done because teachers, if they are deployed to a new post which involves travel, which is not where their family lives, all of these are challenges. And that's why the discussion between the organized teaching profession through the unions and the provincial departments are so critical at this time of the year.
Before I let you go, Prof, the issue of budget cuts, it's across the board, but it's really going to, the pinch will be felt in the education sector. When we think about what the minister had to say in that media briefing this week, to say that all the 9 provinces will need a minimum of 79 billion rand and a maximum of 118 billion rand to be able to survive for the next at least 3 years. Now, looking at the figure that you've just mentioned, the 312 billion, if we're going to add an additional 118 billion to that, you know, it's just under R500 billion. We're clearly not going to get that money.
Yes, because we're not seeing the economic growth that the National Development Plan was projecting as necessary. So that's why these conversations have to be honest, they have to be robust, and they have to be geared towards seeking solutions. The amount of money that's required has got to be carefully thought through in each province. I really like that the minister has said, let's do a 10 by 10, 9 by 9, which is all of the provincial MECs responsible for finance, as well as the provincial MECs responsible for education, together with their national counterparts in education and Treasury, to sit and look in detail. Now, that is one of the most important things that should be happening in provinces right now, which is to really make sure that they've got reliable data about the situation, disaggregated across schools, so that the decisions that need to be made are made in the best interests of improving teaching and learning and sustaining the progress that has been made in education.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Professor Mary Metcalfe. Really appreciate your insights all the time.